Get yourself in the lotus position, because I've got no plan, no pretense, and definitely no bypassing. I'm Josh Connolly, and this will probably be dysfunctional. Here we go again. I think we're on episode 21 as you find us now. And there is a bit of a theme developing now with the podcast, where I like to talk about kind of broader issues, zooming out and looking at the world through a slightly broader lens. And I really passionately have started to realize that the family system that I talk so much about and the abusive structure of the family system is replicated within society, and how we're actually all playing out similar roles within society. And there's a lot going on in the world today, and I'm going to get into some of this today. And I want to talk about, today is going to be actually about what can we do about it? Are we just hopeless? Are we just hopeless victims of the system? Or is there something that we can do? It feels very much, when you look in the world at the moment, there's a lot going on. There feels like there's big change happening. And I think when you look throughout the history of society, the world or societies tend to move in cycles, and it feels like we're maybe at the end of like one and on the cusp of a beginning of a new one. And I have to believe that good will prevail, and good does prevail. But what does this mean for us as humans? And so I do want to talk about where I see spaces as the kind of average person that lives in this society. Where do I see the spaces to create real change? And one of the big things, and one of the big areas that I believe we can start to really create change, is we've got to come back to community. Now, over the course of the episodes that I've done of Dysfunctional, I've talked, I think I did a whole episode on community. My thoughts and my feelings have evolved somewhat probably since then, as I would like to hope that they often do. And I feel like we're living in a very fragmented society. And when we live in a fragmented society, I believe that it makes holding on to power easier for those that are trying to cling to it. And I think a lot of the stuff that I've been listening to and reading at the moment, I've been reading a book called Chemically Imbalanced. And what was super interesting about the book Chemically Imbalanced, and I've not quite finished it, I'm on like the final chapter. And by the way, sorry, let me just give you an outline of what we're going to do today. So we're going to explore what we do about community, what that looks like, and how we can use it to subtly start a revolution. Because that's what I want us to do. But I've got to the end of very near the end of reading this book, Chemically Imbalanced. Now, to give you an overview of the book, it's written by a lady whose name escapes me. I'm ever so sorry. Maybe I should find that and put it in the show notes. But basically, she did she started to look at the use of antidepressants and the way that we, for so long, framed things like depression as some kind of chemical imbalance in the brain, and looked at every single study that was ever, I don't know if it's every single study, but looked at the metadata, looked for everything, and basically dispelled what was a myth that there is any proof that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance. Now, I know, you may not, that may be the first time you're hearing that. Many of you will know that it sort of went public, and it went public when she released all of the data. And as a result of that, she was, the system tried to smear campaign her. They tried to bring her down. And what was super interesting was that, and I'm going to go on to talk about some of this today, she was framed as being right wing, which is a very, very new thing. To challenge the system now is now seen as being alt-right, or dare I even say far-right. If you challenge the system, it's seen as being right-wing, which is a huge change. It's a huge shift, and we're going to get into talk about that. And I want to try and keep on track a little bit if I can. And again, look, I'm going to go into some stuff here and I want to challenge some of your core beliefs. I've been challenging some of my own core beliefs. I'm somebody who runs an online community. And look, I'm not just going to sit here and go, yeah, mine's one of the fucking good ones. But I'm always challenging myself to make sure that it remains community and it remains what community is supposed to be. So yeah, I want to try and get into some of that. So let's talk about what community means, because it has changed dramatically in recent years since the invention of the internet, and then particularly social media, and the ability to be able to come together with a group of people from all over the world now. There's benefits of that, but it has changed what community meant. So what did community used to mean? Community before the days of the internet existed because we lived within a certain distance of one another. So within your town or your village, or if you lived in a city, it would probably be parts of that city. You had your community. We all lived together within that community. We're all very different people, and we have to find a way to live together. We have to find a way to live in community. We have to find a way to be together. And as a result of that, you would have like community centers and sort of central hubs of the communities, whatever they might be. And they could be a bunch of different things, right? And people would come together in those spaces. The pub, which, again, is something that we're losing in our society and in our culture. And of course, there was lots and lots of, I'm sober, right? And talk about the dangers of a problematic relationship with alcohol. So I'm not saying it's black and white, but pubs were definitely, in the UK at least, a central hub for community. But you had these places where people would come together in community centers and pubs and stuff like that. And you would come together for the common good. And your differences, your cultural differences that you may have brought to that community, your different skill set, your different belief systems, you didn't just come together in community in spite of them. It was a positive if you had something that you could bring to the community. So, if you go back years and years when we would perhaps live in tribes and stuff, if you were good at creating fire, you were a good part of the community because you were able to create fire. And then you've got like building shelters, and if you were good with your hands and good with building, then you could build a shelter. If you were good at like thinking and reflection, then you could help to progress what went on in the community. If you were sensitive to subtle changes, I've talked about this in a previous podcast, you could be a watcher and stuff like that. And so community evolved, of course, it did over the years and years and years. And like there's a level of hierarchy, I do believe, that kind of needs to happen within communities and within tribes. And of course, within communities and within tribes, there was always the risk of issues, of problems, of communities and tribes becoming dysfunctional, abuse being able to take place in them, because you'd have to have a certain amount of trust in each other. I'm not necessarily going to go into that today, but I want to be as balanced as I can. But the key thing here is that within a community, your differences may have sometimes brought a little bit of strain, but the common goal of the community was either to put your differences aside or to use your differences to an advantage. So your differences, your different views, your different opinions, your different abilities, your different way of viewing the world, your different way of turning up in the world, all of those things were, in the end, net positive. So you were, if you brought something different, a different opinion or something like that, you were, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like a positive, you were, a benefit to the community, and it was seen as being a good thing to the community, right? And so there were lots of things that would help us celebrate our differences. And like I say, I'm not saying that there wasn't friction in our differences, and there's not always been friction in people's differences. But before the internet, um, that's what community was. Once we opened up the internet and the internet gave us access to everybody on the planet, there were some huge positives as a result of that. You've seen lots of people be able to explore shame in a way that they might not be able to. Yeah, that thing that you thought you were the only person on the planet that had it, and perhaps there was nobody within your community that you could find that maybe, I don't know, suffered with a certain type of thing or had a personality trait that nobody else related to. Even things like hobbies and stuff like that. You may have lived in a community where there was nobody that you could find. The internet gives you access to all of them, right? So I've used the internet and social media in this way to certainly promote. If you look at what I do for toxic parents and people that have grown up with abusive parents, right? Now, anywhere in the world, people can land on my page and go, oh my God, I'm not alone. That's a huge positive, right? As a result of that, you can create community spaces for that, right? I've got an online community space. Mine isn't specifically for toxic parents and for reasons that I want to try and get into, but you can find specific community spaces. And I think they're really important. Specific spaces for specific genders. I use a specific space for people that identify as a man, right? I go there once a month. That's really important to me. I go to a 12-step meeting still once a week. And that is so I can be around people that are in recovery, right? So these are specific things. Now, both of those things and any specific community will always have the battle of having to fight against dogma, right? If you're in a men's group, right, there is like, you have to kind of define what a man is, right? And so you have to you have your certain ways. When you're in a recovery group, right, you have to then define what does being in recovery mean, right? And like I go to ones that are specifically for alcohol, and then so you have the debates about should you talk about drugs in there and like all of those things. So there's always going to be there's needle within those specific communities, right? There's crunchiness within those specific communities, but that gets hyper focused when we're online, because now a lot of these communities, in the way that I've just sort of described with the spaces that I go to, you are part of the community because you conform. So if you're all in the community because you all believe one certain thing, that community can quickly become dogmatic. It can become quickly very cult-like, and it can become quickly the reason that you're in the community is because you conform and you have the same beliefs, right? Now, there's a lot of danger that then comes with that, right? To be in the community, I've written, you have to believe exactly the same thing. And if you don't in a lot of these communities, well, then you risk being ostracized. So now you start to see that once upon a time in community, your differences, seeing the world in a different way, having a different viewpoint, having a different skill set was a positive attribute to have for the community. In what we now call community, having a different outset, a different skill set, and a different way of looking at things can get you ostracized. What that means is then you have to start conforming, right? You get performative unity. And you see this all of the time, right? Even in like the healing space, right? People start to talk in a certain way. And I talked last week about the kind of colonization and the whitewashing, but people start to use a certain language. People start to try and conform more and more and more, because that's how you become a better part of the community, a bigger part of the community. You get more accepted the more clear your beliefs and truths are in line with what that community believes. Before the internet, you turn up and you're like, oh, I've got this skill set. Nobody's ever seen it before. Oh my God, this is brilliant, right? I see the world in this way. Oh, you're going to really help the community move forward. In community in today, your differences, your being different will get you potentially rejected. And so they become cult-like. And you end up not sharing a difference of opinion and choosing to conform in order to be able to fit into the system. And so, look, I'm going to use an example that is going to feel crunchy for a lot of people that listen, but I'm going to use it. We've seen the explosion of the neurodiversity conversation, which is fucking needed. I'm so grateful that it's here. I know that it has and does save lives for a lot of people. However, there is also a sense that if you want to be part of that community, it feels like there's a few rules that you need to abide to. I consider myself in all definitions to be neurodivergent, by the way. However, I don't feel a part of the neurodivergent community because, and I would argue it's part of my neurodivergence, I question everything and I see things differently and I look at things from different angles. And I like to challenge with hypotheses that go against what everybody else is saying. And so, like, you realize that in order to be part of the community, if you don't want to be ostracized and you want to be a fully fledging member of the community, you have to conform. And so even in something like that is driven by people wanting to do good, to create a community for people that once upon a time had none, and were only shamed for how they felt, you then start to create these echo chambers. And again, it happens in recovery communities as well. I believe the sober community has done it. The same has happened with the sober community. Again, I'm 13 years sober, nearly 13 years sober. I love sobriety. I love helping people get sober and all of that. I don't feel like I can be a part of the sober community online because I don't conform. There seems to be a certain set of views and a certain set of values. And if you don't have them, you'll find yourself ostracized and you'll be an outlier. And it's not easy to be an outlier. And so we conform. And then what happens is we don't evolve our ways of thinking. We end up fighting against one another. And then you end up with lots of people feeling lost and like they can't be part of certain communities because they all become so dogmatic. They have a list of unwritten rules and a list of unwritten beliefs that you must follow. And if you don't follow, then you can't be and won't be part of the community. Now, nobody ever says that explicitly in both of the communities that I've just talked about. And the only reason I use those two as an example is because they're two communities that I should be a fully fledging member of because of my life experiences. And I don't feel like I can be a part of either of them. The same is probably true for the breathwork community. There's a common denominator here, isn't there? But my point is that it's very difficult to be a critical thinker now. And there'll be lots of people here that would argue and say, well, what makes you a critical thinker? And you think that we're not critical thinkers. But I want to get on to why I think this is important, right? And why I think we need to, and by the way, I'm not saying we should get rid of these communities. I don't think we should get rid of the sober community. I don't think we certainly shouldn't get rid of the neurodiversity community. I don't think we should get rid of any of these communities that exist. They are a lifeline for a lot of people. But I do think that we need to remember what community truly is and how do we make sure that we act as a community, because a community is not one that means that everybody needs to conform to the ideology of the community. That is essentially, in the end, it becomes religion. And so communities are becoming a lot more like religion. They are a lot more dogma based. Yeah, they are a lot more cult like. Follow, conform, do as you're told, or don't be part of the community. But actually what it is in most cases is a cult. And we're all guilty of this, right? I run communities online. I'm part of communities online, and I can feel a sense of discomfort as I talk about it because I have to be really careful within my communities that they don't become cult-like. And I feel like one of the ways that I do that, and maybe we'll get onto this, but I feel like one of the ways that I really try and do that within my spaces is no fixing, no, like, you don't get to tell somebody else what's right for them. And I think that's really important. And so I really want to try and bring back what it is to mean community and how do we find that. Now, what you end up with, and I hope I'm making sense here. The great thing about this podcast, I guess, is that like I am pushing out ideas as I formulate them. And it's definitely fucking time, man. I'm speaking aloud and thinking aloud here as we go, but it's definitely time to I want to get people in that speak to this stuff and know that we can really start to explore the conversation. So I fucking promise you that's going to happen. I have a week off next week because it's half term here, school holidays. And then, yeah, I'm going to start reaching out to people. So what we end up with is these very fragmented areas of community, which are like large groups of people that are all over the world. And so when you live in your own country and you have your kind of political policies and your people of power within your country, you don't have these big, growing, ever-forming communities within each country, because I'm over here part of a sober community with people from all around the world, which is amazing. But there may, if I'm in a community of, say, even 1,000 people, what percentage of that are within my own country and could actually do anything to change policy and create change and put pressure on the people that are in power? So what you start to realize is that when we don't have local and centralized communities that come together for the greater good, when you don't have them, we are handing power. We're handing power to those who have a complete imbalance of power and are already clinging on to the main majority of the power. How do we ever put pressure on them if we can't put our differences aside and come together as a team? And think about it if, like me, you believe that we live in an abusive structure. And what does abusive structure mean, just in case you haven't listened to any of the other podcasts? If we live in an abusive structure, then the balance of the power is in one place, and the people that have the balance of that power are abusing it, right? And they are working very, very hard to make sure that the people that don't have the balance of power still believe that they are being loved and looked after, right? That's how abuse works. That's how abuse works on any level. And the abuser will make the people that they're abusing believe that they have to rely on them and that there is no other way. That's why it's, parents, it's very easy, and is that the right word? I think it is very easy for a parent to abuse a child, because the child relies entirely on them and doesn't believe, and probably in many cases there isn't any other way of them living. If you get in a relationship with an abusive person, one of the first things that they will need to try and do is pull you in, make you rely on them, rip away any other support systems that you have, so that you don't believe that there is any other way, so you can't get out of it. So you have to just kind of accept it. And then all of a sudden you start supporting the abuse because you believe that the person that is abusing you is the one that's looking after you. And so that's what I believe is happening on a societal level. The way that you do that in a family system as the abuser is you get the siblings to argue against one another, yeah? So the siblings forget that they're in the same family or that they're on the same team. And so you can see how that's these fragmented these fragmented communities start to happen. We just fucking handing power to the abuser. And that's never felt more clear than if you didn't see it, the argument between Gary Stevens and Simon Squibb. Simon Squibb has come out and sort of in, I would argue, sort of typical golden child fashion, attacking the scapegoat. You just need to fucking do what I'm doing. I made it out. It can't be that bad, right? But either way, they argue amongst each other, and then we don't look up at the abuse, and the abuse continues to happen. And I do believe that we have a belief and we have a feeling and we have a sense as part of society that there's no other way. And I hear it all of the time. I hear people that are doing the work, that believe they're far along in the work, and they believe that by saying, I don't look at politics, I don't think about politics, I just carry on working on myself, all I can change is my reality. I would argue that that's fucking slightly narcissistic, because healing has to happen in the collective. And if you don't have an eye on what's going on from those in power and the kind of overall abuse that's happening to all of us, then just working on yourself and I can only change my reality is turning your back on the collective. That's going, wow, I've sort of found a way to move out of what I need to move out of and fuck everybody else that's still suffering, right? So like, I do feel that once you're ready, once you feel like you've done a bit of work on yourself, then it's only natural that you start looking at the collective issue and the collective need for healing. And so we're part of a system where we're all shouting at each other. We're all kind of trying to blame one another. You're the problem, you're the problem. And then we live within our own kind of communities, and the communities battle against each other and they're very fragmented. We have to start to understand that we can all have different beliefs, but that we're on the same team. And I talked about this at the beginning, but just to go back there for a minute, there's like a real weaponization of our belief systems. And I touched on this again, but I'll just talk about what I've written here. I saw a great meme, shout out Fabian. You know who you are. I saw you share it. That said, once upon a time, if you were sort of a little bit wary of the big pharma, you ate whole foods because you didn't like processed foods, and you used a lot of herbal remedies, and you wanted to unplug from the system, you were seen as like a angry left liberal, right? You would have been taken the piss out of for being a liberal left hippie, right? You would have been. But in today's world, if you don't trust big pharma, you eat whole foods and you use herbal remedies and you want to unplug from the system, you're seen as alt-right, or dare I even say far-right, which is a bizarre turn of events when you think about it. Like, it's sort of flipped the political system on its head in terms of our belief systems. And I think it's done on purpose. I think it's done so that, like, it feels to me like a bamboozling attack. I think it's driven by a bamboozling attack. Might sound like too strong a language, by the way. But it's not a conspiracy to believe that when there are large groups of people holding on to power, that they won't create and do tactics that inevitably hold on to their power. You have to understand how these systems work. I'm not suggesting that they're all meeting up at secret conferences every year and going, how do we do this? But when you have lobbying, when you have governments that are supported by lobbying and certain amounts of money are going in here and it's getting moved over there. I read in that book that I talked about earlier, I think it's £8.2 billion is spent per year. £8.2 billion per year is spent by big pharma on advertising, right? Marketing. So then you start to go, well, the media who do the marketing, the platforms which that marketing is used for, it's not too much of a stretch to think they might be a little bit reliant on that 8.2 billion. And if they're a bit reliant on that 8.2 billion, could they be swerved into what they do, what they show, and how they regulate? So that's not a conspiracy to say that. It's not a conspiracy to think that. We should be fucking putting them under pressure to make sure that money is not coming over everything else. Like, that's not a conspiracy to me. That's like basic thinking. So I think on top of that, on like micro levels, with social media now, you used to like have friends who might have had difference of opinions than you. And so you might have had, your mate fucking Dave, who had some certain opinions on a certain thing. And so, I don't know, certain political views. Dave was all right. He was a good crack, decent mate, looked after his kids. But he was a bit of a dick when it came to this view that he had. So you wouldn't talk to him about it, right? The problem is in today's world is Dave's doing posts about it on his social media every day. And so all you see, unless you meet up with Dave, and you probably don't meet up with him as much as you used to, but you know, if you're not meeting up with him pretty regularly, you forget that he's nice to his kids and looks after his family. You forget about the times when he sort of, you know, scratched your back and helped you out and did you all of those favors, because you just see him every day talking about his opinion online, and you think Dave's a prick. When actually Dave is just expressing his opinion, but he's doing it regularly. Now his opinions become his brand, and you're no longer sort of able to be mates with Dave, because you forget all the good about him, because 5, 6, 7 days a week you're just hammered by his opinion that you don't agree with. And so you can see as well how we become even more fragmented again, and we don't know how to come together. Now, your mate Dave probably also realizes that the people in power are mugging us off. He's got a different way of a different belief in how they're doing it from you. But actually, if you remembered that you were on the same team and put your differences aside and came together in a community hall, metaphorically speaking, like we did once upon a time, and said, how do we come together to make sure that we don't have all this power taken away from us? Dave could be a fucking brilliant ally in terms of going against the power structure that exists. Do you understand what I'm saying here? But in today's world, it becomes harder and harder and harder for us to do that. So how do we start to fight back? How do we start to create change in this world in, you know, some of the things that I've said here? Well, the only way is to come back together and remember we're on the same team. It's to start to realize that if there is a common enemy, it's the ones who are holding on to a power and abusing it and not allowing us any of our own power. We don't need to all agree. We just need to remember that we're on the same side. And how do we bring back centralized communities? How do we come back together in spite of our differences, in spite of our difference of opinion, to remember, all right, we got some semantic stuff over here. We can debate, we can discuss, but then we come back together and remember on the same team, fighting the same, I don't want to call it enemy because it sounds war-like, but we are fighting against the same common problem, and the common problem is the imbalance of power, and the imbalance of power is being held on to the people at the top, and that's who we need to fight back about. I've put bring it back to local grounded connection, sharing stories, supporting each other, building collective resilience. So hearing one another's stories, remembering that Dave with the fucking annoying opinion politically has a backstory, absolutely looks after his children in an incredible way, looks after you, you can look after each other. Remember that about him. Remember that we're human. We're more than our fucking LinkedIn opinions or your Twitter or Facebook shit that people put out there. People are more than that. There's a human being behind that. So let's come back into community more regularly. Let's try and do that in person. What community spaces are you involved in locally, and how do you come back to them? And I'm somebody who struggles to be around people too much, right? So like, how do I go out of my comfort zone? How do I, if I want to be part of the solution, how do I be part of the solution? How do I find ways to be back in community with other people? Community isn't about agreement. It's about belonging anyway. It's about coming together with Dave and remembering the common cause, remembering the need to be together. And there's some fucking roadworks going on in the background now, so I'm going to try and talk over them. What I try to do, you know, when I look up belong, and just to think about my own spaces that I've created, when I create belong, we've now stripped it right back so that you don't, you know, we do a bit of breath work there because that's kind of what draws people in. But before the breathwork and after the breathwork, it's about community. It's about how do we be together, support each other, share our wins, share what we're doing in the world, help one another, build each other up, bring people together in that way. That's what true community is. We allow our differences. We allow a bunch of different people to be together. Discussion can be had when discussion is needed, but otherwise we remember that each and every one of us are human. And I am absolutely fuming about this work that's going on out here. Trying to find where it is. I got no idea. But I have just knocked that on the floor. Anyway, we're going to draw this to a close because it's all going all over the place here. So closing thoughts. Let's bring this to a close because I'm not going to be able to concentrate with that digger out there. Try and think of one opinion that you're too scared to say out loud. Where have you cut someone off just because they think differently? Where have you been triggered by somebody and then not allowed yourself to be in connection, communion, or in friendship with them? Are they behind it all a good person, right? And again, by the way, community, let's just remember on that thing. We don't have to be friends with everybody in the community. This isn't about welcoming everybody into our home and going out with the family with them. It's how do we put our differences aside and come together as a collective in community to support one another? How do I get past Dave's stupid LinkedIn post from last week to still be in community with him, to come together, to bring back centralized community for the common cause? How do I create community spaces in my local area? How do I put aside my differences, and how do I start to find ways to come back to people? And by the way, I've probably been somebody who has stopped this happening in some ways. I'm probably guilty of being a little bit like, fuck everyone. If they're, if I don't like them, don't be anywhere near them. But that's not community either. And so I have to call myself out on that. And how do I come back into communities? And I like to think that I'm doing that with my community spaces that I do. There's no right to passage. Yeah, you don't have to be or do or anything to come to the community space here. And so we can't beat the systems by ourselves. We have to start coming back to communities in this way. And this is going to be my focus in many ways with the podcast. And so I hope to be bringing you guests very, very soon where we can talk more about this. We can expand on some of this stuff and bring different views, different opinions, different ways of seeing the world, and seeing if we can have a common bond on that. I think I'm done. The fucking whatever happened outside just pissed me off. But I always told you this would be unfiltered, unedited, and just real. So at least you know that that's fucking true. And I hope that noise won't go on for too long. I tried to just talk over it. I don't think I'll be here next week with the podcast because I am away. As I say, it's family holidays. But once we come back, we'll be back on episode 22. And I'll be looking to bring guests in then. And we'll really be going for it. You have my word. As always, I've been Josh Connolly. And this was definitely dysfunctional. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional. So thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.